What is up, Steelers Nation? Thank you so much for jumping on to another episode of All Steelers Talk. I'm Noah Strackbine, joined by my main man, Steven Thompson, and our favorite guest of the show, Nick Martin. Find us on youtube.com/All Steelers Talk, or subscribe anywhere you get your podcast. And as we've been saying for the last couple of weeks, make sure to go subscribe to our new YouTube channel, youtube.com/All Steelers Talk clips, for even more All Steelers Talk. It is a special day here at All Steelers Talk as our boy Nick Martin released the craziest piece of work that I have seen in a long, long time. His 2024 NFL Draft Guide, which includes over 60 player reports, I believe 200 positional rankings, and over 200 on your big board. 250? 260, somewhere in that
around
realm?
Like 230 plus, yeah, or so.
230 plus. Everybody, please go check that out at allsteelers.com. It is, I mean, I'm halfway through it. I stayed up until about 1 a.m. last night checking this bad boy out, and I didn't know half these guys, or at least most things about half these guys. And by the time it was done, I felt like I was a draft expert. Nick, I got to ask, how did it feel to let that bad boy out? How long did it take you? And, what were your thoughts on your own work here?
So the reports definitely took me the longest, probably took me over a span of about a month or so. And, it's a very long writing process of how that ends up going, because I like to be very detailed with how I do my reports, because yeah. I'm like always like, all right, I got to cover this exact thing. I want to make sure I explain it as thoroughly as it could possibly be, so no one, thinks any different about it. And obviously, like, there are ways I can streamline the process. There's a lot of stuff I want to improve for future iterations. And it's not quite Dane Brugler's The Beast, but it's still my work, and I'm proud of what I've done to this point. And I would appreciate any sort of feedback on it as much as I can get.
Yeah, you should 100% be proud. It is unbelievable. I even had my fiance last night, who knows nuts. She probably couldn't tell you who the starting quarterback in Pittsburgh is this season. And she was like, wow, dude, this is impressive, because I was sitting there, I pulled it up right on the screen, and we were looking at it as I was sitting there getting my night workout in on the standing treadmill. Steven, how are you feeling today? And have you gotten a chance to check out some of this draft guide?
I've skimmed it, just looked through it as it dropped this morning. I'm full of energy, though. I mean, between draft guide dropping, stuff we're talking about today, little Friday, I am full of energy today. I'm really excited for this episode. I think we're going to have a lot of fun.
It is going to be a good one. We're going to dive into the top Steelers prospects. Obviously, Nick dropped his guide, so there's plenty to go off of there. A good conversation. Trade up versus trade back. The Pittsburgh Steelers have been linked and predicted and rumored for both, and I think it's time to finally narrow down what's the right move for the Pittsburgh Steelers, and then we'll end it off with the biggest draft questions of the Steelers in 2024. Steven, I got to ask, because I've been meaning to ask. You're going to miss Russ throwing the first pitch by 24 hours, my friend. That bothering you a little bit? You don't get to – I don't even know who's throwing out the first pitch on Saturday, but it's not Russell Wilson.
It is not Russell Wilson. Maybe Justin Fields gets that option, and I think I will be a little bit more excited for that one.
That'd be a good one.
Yeah, no, I am just, I am a little disappointed, because I think my seats are pretty good for Friday night, or for Saturday afternoon, quite honestly. So I could have been cozied up with, I could have been rubbing elbows with Russell Wilson and Ciara on Friday. But, going to miss it by that much.
By that much. It's all right. Dreams sometimes come true. Sometimes you got to wait an extra day. Who knows? Nick, let's start with you. Let's dive into the Pittsburgh Steelers' top prospects here. We are less than a week away from the draft. We have heard everything from wide receiver, cornerback, offensive tackle, draft a center in the first round. Don't draft a center in the first round. Maybe you go with this center. Maybe you go with that one. What if this guy is available? I dropped the name Byron Murphy the other day, and everybody's like, what? Yep. Nope. I think it's a real name to watch if he's floating around there. You just finished 60 player reports and 230 big board rankings. Who are your top guys for the Pittsburgh Steelers in the 2024 draft class?
It's always really funny when I'm on the podcast and then you're asking me about the Steelers prospects, because my answer has not changed since the time we have started talking about the draft. It is still Oregon center Jackson Powers Johnson, and in my
Wow.
honest, it's he has one of the most complete sets of film that I have seen out of a center. He just has constant displacement at the first and second level. He pulls effectively. He's strong on reach blocks. There's so much that he can do that you don't have to like protect him. And that's one of those things about a center. Like if you are not gonna like when it comes to centers nowadays, so many like defensive schemes are trying to line their pass rushers up in the A gap to line up over the center.
Yeah.
And I don't have concerns about Jackson Powers Johnson having to take on like Jadeveon Clowney on a power rush or, up the middle one-on-one. And that's like important. I think Powers Johnson is the top prospect for me. He will remain that way for me. Obviously, the Steelers are potentially thinking elsewhere with how their pre-draft visits are going. Maybe they might be changing up their draft strategy. I would definitely have very little complaints if they end up settling for someone like Graham Barton in the first round, who is one of the top, relative athletic scoring athletes to grace the center position. There's just a little bit of questions about like, cleaning up his hand usage and keeping his chest clean. But there is a relatively like strong profile there, and the advanced analytics behind a pick like that, I can definitely get on board.
Let me ask this before, while you're sticking with the centers, you might be the only one left on, or at least outside of. I think the fan base is still thinking Jackson Powers Johnson. You get a lot of analysts that are saying Graham Barton. Why are you Jackson Powers Johnson over Graham Barton here?
So the reason I'm JPJ over Graham Barton is specifically because I think there is less projection work that I have to do with JPJ versus a Graham Barton. Now, I've read Dane Brugler's The Beast Guide, and there has been a little bit of an injury history potentially with Jackson Powers Johnson. Dealt with a few concussions, had groin and hip injuries, hamstring injuries as well. And he has been able to fight through most of these injuries and be able to play as effectively as he can. So I'm not too concerned about it. And what I have noticed, and I kind of pay attention a little bit to this, I was always curious about why Jackson Powers Johnson was wearing the helmet that he does. Like it's one of the newer models, because whenever I see a player wearing the newer model, I'm like, okay, they must have suffered a few concussions, or because like it usually ends up, leading to that a little bit. But I have zero complaints with someone like Graham Barton. I have them like separated differently, tiered differently, but I think they're both like really phenomenal players. If you want to go with like a tackle in the first round, I do think there are guys that you can get later at center that can still be of great use, but I think it's just, to me, JPJ is that guy I'm projecting to be a future all-pro, potentially the best at his position. I don't want to overthink it. I want to be on the show and give you something new, but I want to just be like, no, it's the same. It's how I've felt for a while. And Jackson Powers Johnson, he's my guy.
I mean, don't feel bad you're cutting against the grain a little bit here.
Yeah.
Like, not just in terms of what the Steelers want, but Jackson Powers Johnson has fluctuated, I feel like, all over the end of that first round for the past, I don't know, month and a half, 2 months. What makes you confident that it's not a reach at 20? Like, is it something where they could trade back for and still land Jackson Powers Johnson?
I think, considering the potential medicals with JPJ and the fact we've seen guys like Kuiper say that what he's hearing from the league is the centers might go a little later, but then you read that someone like Zach Frazier might go in the first round according to Peter Schrager, and that Graham Barton's going to be the first center off the board. So you're getting a little bit of mixed signals there. It does give me a signal though that JPJ is more of a trade back opportunity type of guy. And I think with teams like Buffalo potentially wanting to move up for a receiver like a Brian Thomas Jr., it would make a lot of sense to move back and get your best player available at that point, like I think it would really work out in the Steelers' favor. They could also trade back and potentially get their top tackle as well. Armarius Mims is a little bit of an in an interesting spot because there's been instances where he didn't even finish games half the time and he would have to like come in and out, rotate with guys because he was dealing with injuries so much. And I think that is really concerning if you want to go with like a first round tackle. But I totally get the upside of Amarius Mims because he's one of those guys who's just so stout as a pass protector. He's got like one of the best anchors you'll see. Like he just consistently sits on power, never gets moved back on contact. I don't necessarily think he's like a technician. It's just that he's so smooth at being able to mirror rushers and just being ready for them that he can just win with his level of power and athleticism.
Do you see Mims as a guy? Is he a reach at 20? That was my question for you.
It would technically be a reach on my board, but it's a lot of contextual arguments of injury history with him. Do you feel comfortable taking the risk if he ends up playing as long as he can and like, you know, he doesn't have issues with injuries? That pick could be like a slam dunk. Like Mims, the inexperience, people conflate inexperience with rawness. If there's any aspect of Armarius Mims that is raw, it is his ability as a run blocker, which he tends to not get as low in his pad level, and he tends to lunge and reach a lot at the second, first level, and it's something he's got to like really work on. But when you talk about displacement, he has that in droves, and there's a lot to work with in that regard. So Mims, you got like a solid pass protector and you got a promising run blocker at the same time, but you have to factor in the injuries to go with that as well. And I guess if we're being fair, you do the same with a guy like Jackson Powers Johnson. Maybe that's why the Steelers are leaning towards a guy like Grant Barton.
I get that. When it comes to, do you see any, I mean, I've been told that, I don't know, roughly 85% chance. It'd be real surprising if the Steelers went a different direction than offensive line in the first round. There's like a handful of guys. I'm excited to ask you about this guy. Where's Cooper DeJean on your big board? Do you see him as a guy that if he's sitting there at 20, you can't pass up? Because I do. And I've been told that the Steelers might think the same way.
So Cooper DeJean is interesting. I'm very mixed on how I view him as a corner or safety prospect. I think as a safety, I am a little more comfortable with his overall projection, just because I think in terms of his man-to-man coverage, I think he's a little bit more raw in how he reads the hips. He's a little prone to opening the gate a little bit too often. He's a very smooth player. He's very fluid. He's clearly got speed. Like he has like the athleticism. There's no issues there with Cooper DeJean in the slightest. But I think if you're asking like, you know, where his skill set might fit best, the way he comes down, defends the run. I've seen him take on like pulling blockers, be able to blow up plays and still like, you know, create openings for his teammates. I say to myself, that could fit really well at safety. He could be a strong off-man quarters type of guy that you match on slot receivers. And I think that type of player works really well for what the Steelers want to pair with a guy like Minkah Fitzpatrick. So if you want to go that direction, I definitely would feel pretty comfortable. He's about 26 on my board. I have Terrion Arnold and Quinion Mitchell ahead of them.
Yeah.
But
yeah, those are guys you can't pass. Quinion Mitchell is there's no chance he makes it to 20. But I remember sitting there at the NFL Combine and being told, like, if there's one guy that is available for the Pittsburgh Steelers that they wouldn't even think about, it would take them 0 seconds to put his name in for their selection. It was Quinion Mitchell. And that just makes all the sense in the world. I want to ask you one more before we go into the trade up versus trade back. Wide receivers. Where do you see the Steelers going wide receivers? Where are your top prospects for them in this draft?
So my top wide receiver prospects for the Steelers, I would say the one that they are highly considering the most at like at 51 has to be Ricky Pearsall. Ricky Pearsall is a just absolutely strong talent at the wide receiver position. His hands, his ability to contort his body in the air, the way he can create separation in and out, outside and in the slot. There are great aspects to his game with being able to block as well. He fits well with the Arthur Smith type of profile. I would say that he's a tremendous fit for what they ask their receivers to do. And I think he is a player that would be a slam dunk at 51, as far as I'm concerned. Now, you've asked me a little bit on a trade up. If they want to trade up and take one of the big three receivers in like Rome Odunze, Malik Neighbors, Marvin Harrison Jr., you would see zero complaints from me, even though they would basically be punting on some of their biggest needs. Yeah. But, you know, when it comes to players like that, I totally get like why they would want to, you know, do that. But I doubt they'll end up doing that in the slightest.
So there's no chance that it's a first round guy, that there's no chance there is a Brian Thomas or A.D. Mitchell in their future?
I don't believe so, no.
Why not?
I when it comes to A.D. Mitchell, I think he is a strong man-to-man separator. There's a lot of good aspects with that part of his film, but he's a little bit on the raw side in terms of zone coverage. The effort concerns are very interesting with his tape because there are times where he is like, he knows he is very late into the progression. He knows Quinn Ewers is going to not be able to get to him at that point. So he might not, you know, he might like pull up on a play for a little bit. And some people have issues with that and some do not. Xavier Worthy does a little bit of the same thing. It could be more part of the Texas scheme as opposed to what they're at, as opposed to like a true effort thing. Because if you go back to his tape at Georgia, he's constantly hustling his butt off.
Yeah, that makes sense. All right, let's dive into. Oh, you got more? Go ahead, Steven.
Well, Brian Thomas. Any thoughts?
Brian Thomas. Brian
Thomas is Steven's guy. That's if you had to say who's the Steelers' first round pick. Steven's going Brian Thomas.
I like Brian Thomas. He's a really solid prospect. He's a guy I would be very comfortable with them sticking and picking at that spot. I think he is strong in terms of his vertical profile. He's got a developing route profile. I think he sits well in the chair on top of stopping routes. Like he can run those types of routes. I think there's potential for a complete type of profile. I do think he needs to clean up a little bit of his attack in terms of like how he attacks the ball in the air consistently. I do think he doesn't always attack to its highest point when it always merits. And I think there's a little bit of work to be done in that regard. But overall, I'm pretty pleased with what I've seen from Brian Thomas. I actually, on a comp spectrum, I compared him to Tyrell Williams and Demaryius Thomas. Like he's on that type of spectrum. And I think you could see him reach one of those outcomes. Tyrell Williams is a very interesting player because he was actually a very like notable player that like outperformed expectations for a while, and injuries kind of ruined the end of his career. And I think a player like that is valuable to what an offense can bring. And I think someone like Brian Thomas, that vertical profile that he brings is so appealing to a team that throws, you know, vertically like the Steelers do, or a team like the Buffalo Bills who really love, you know, are looking for a potential Gabe Davis replacement in that regard. And not just that, but Stephon Diggs.
I was going to say a little bit of everybody. Did everybody see that? Apparently Brian Thomas is going to be better than Malik Neighbors and Marvin Harrison Jr. because FanDuel released their top 20 wide receiver rankings or something, and Rome Odunze is ranked 9th or 8th and ahead of George Pickens and Zay Flowers and DeAndre Hopkins and a whole bunch of other good names. And then Brian Thomas is the only other incoming rookie on that list at 11, which my immediate thought went, did they forget? Did they forget about Marvin Harrison Jr. and Malik? Are those guys just not? I guess I'm wrong. But that's how they see them. We'll see. Let's talk about stuff you just talked about, trade up versus trade back, because I'm very interested to hear everybody's thoughts on this. The Steelers have been given or predicted to move both ways. It's been matches with the Arizona Cardinals, the Buffalo Bills, the Dallas Cowboys was yesterday. Then you're talking about Mark Caboli saying, oh, well, they can move up, and that's probably the most likely scenario, if there's any scenario, that they move up to go get an offensive tackle. Steven, let's start with you. Trade up versus trade back scenario here for the Pittsburgh Steelers. What side do you lean, and what side makes the most sense for the Steelers here?
I lean trade back. I don't know if this is what I actually don't think that this is actually what they're going to do. I don't think they're really considering trading back at all. I think Caboli might actually be pretty spot on. I think if they're doing anything, they're trading up. I think they should trade back, though. I think that would be a very prudent move for them, just because I think this is a year where they could use as many draft picks as they possibly can get in rounds 2 and 3. To be quite honest with you. And they've already got 3 there, so they're like mostly set. Like, I'm fine if they don't trade back, but I think they can really help themselves a ton by trading back. I just think of their top 3 needs, and I think these 3 needs are places where you need another starter going. You need someone at this position to be a starter going into 2024. That's tackle, center, and wide receiver. You need to get someone who's capable of starting in this draft, it seems like. And I just think by the time you get through rounds 1 and 2 and you use pick 20, you use pick 51, it's going to be really slim pickings in rounds they're not picking until the middle of round 3 and the end of round 3. That worries me a little bit if you're trying to get starting caliber players at each of those positions. So I really want them to load up on picks earlier. I want to see if they can move up in round 3. And I think if you trade back, and especially if you're trading back, with a team like the Bills or a team like Dallas, or it's even Arizona, like, who has 1 million draft picks in kind of those later rounds, like, you have a chance to build a little capital after day 1, and potentially, and even like not only just build what you've got in rounds 3, because that's I don't know, for most of these situations, you're probably gonna, if you're trading back, you're ending up with a round 3 pick, but if you give yourself some more capital, you can consider trading up into the top half of round 2,
Yeah.
Like, you can give yourself a second chance to land, a Zach Frazier or a Lad McConkey, depending on what you do. Like, there are better options for you, and you can address some more of these immediate needs that you have if you just kind of build your draft capital on day 2. So that's why I'm pro trade back. I think that you have a bunch of teams that'd be really interested, a bunch of teams that you could put some pressure on to give you a good return, and then you build another really strong class that you could build on right away.
Yeah, before I give my opinion, Nick, I want to hear yours. Trade up versus trade back.
Trade back. For me, I think trading up puts you in a position where you cannot address like certain needs like corner, and I don't think they want to leave that out. Like, especially if it's going to be an interesting spot because day 3 is where the depth kind of drops off in the draft, and you'll see, positions like corner really start to get thinner. There's a lot of guys that just did not test as strongly as you would hope for, versus like last year's class where you had guys like Darius Rush going in like the 5th round who were 4.36 type athletes and had some promising aspects to their film. I do think that they're going to want to potentially entertain getting another pick as opposed to going up and trying to get like that blue chip, if that makes sense.
No, I agree. I agree with both you guys. I think that if you trade up, you're giving up way too much in a draft where you have specific needs. If this was just like whoever get the best player available, you're down to 1 spot, cool. But the Steelers left themselves with 4 ginormous needs. Not like, well, we could just, no. The only one that you could, okay, well, we could just is probably left tackle. And that's like, it's barely an, we could just. It's not good enough. You got to go out and get a center. You got to go out and get a corner. You got to go out and get a wide receiver. You got to go out and get an offensive tackle. If you don't do all those 4 things, you literally have nobody to replace them. Like, if the Steelers go offensive line in rounds 1 and 2, that's great, except for the fact that they literally don't have a starting slot corner, and Calvin Austin is their wide receiver too. It doesn't make any sense. And if you're thinking wide receiver trade, great. And I think that that's on the table after the NFL draft, but I still think that they want a wide receiver 3 or a wide receiver 2B. I don't think that that's off the table for them. You have to have as many draft picks as humanly possible. I also think that at 20, the options are going to be so wide, but at the same time, none of them are going to be like, you have to draft this guy, that they could move back with some ease. Like, you could look at the situation and say, all right, yeah, we could get an Armarius Mims, but if we trade back, chances are Tyler Guyton's still going to be there, or Jackson Powers Johnson's going to be on the board, or Graham Barton's still going to be available. There's just no need to, I don't know, kind of like make the move forward for somebody when you'll have the options moving back. I will say that if offensive tackles start flying off the board and you're sitting there and you're going, okay, well, we're not going to get anybody, maybe you consider it, but I don't think it makes some sense.
We were asking Nick about his top prospects for the Steelers in round 1, and at basically every name that he mentioned, we were like, is that a reach at 20? Like, that's the thing. Everyone is either going to feel, I think everyone that the Steelers could pick at 20, you're going to be like, that's a little bit of a reach. We could have gotten someone just as good at, 24 if we trade with the Cowboys, 28 if we trade with the Bills, 27 if we trade with Arizona. Like, the idea that like it's not a disaster if you miss on Mims in the first round, because you could take, I don't know his name, but the Yale tackle or in round 2 somewhere. You could get, Cedric Van Pran like in the 3rd or 4th round. Like, I don't know. There are so like the fact that they have so many needs. Like, I saw someone say the other day, like, if you're going best player available at 20 or somewhere else in the draft, then you can't address needs. I'm like, I don't think that's true. I think they have too many needs to the point where, like, if you're taking best player available, the odds that you hit on a need that you have is pretty high, when you have 4 positions that you need. So I'm not worried at all about, like, I don't know, missing on one of these prospects that's going to be available at 20, because, 4, 5, 6, 7 picks later, if the Steelers are there and they trade back, there's going to be someone worth taking at that spot.
Yeah, I agree. Nick, let me ask you this to kind of round out this conversation here. What are you do not trade back guys that realistic guys at 20? Do you have any of them?
So you're asking me guys I would not want them to pick in the trade back scenario?
No, guys that if the Steelers are sitting there at 20, realistic guys that if they're sitting there at 20, you do not make a move. You draft that guy before you move backwards.
I mean, I would that one's really interesting. I would say it's someone like Troy Fautanu from Washington, because he really fits like what they would be wanting in an offensive tackle. I think what Fautanu brings to the table, he is one of the most fluid players. He actually reminds me quite a bit of Zach Tom. I was a pretty big fan of Zach Tom coming out of Wake Forest. And you watch him in pass protection, he is just so silky smooth. He uses independent hand usage. He's ready for what guys throw at him. And I really love that aspect to his game. I think someone like him, or potentially JC Latham, if he ends up falling that far. I think Latham probably ends up going like earlier than people expect. But if Fautanu for some reason fell, I would fully like want to stay at pick 20. I don't want to get out of that spot. He also has potential, 5 position vertisality as well. I was going to say.
I don't know. If you have 5 positions, do you have one? Like, that's. I don't buy that whole, like, he can play all 5 positions, man. Like, I don't think anyone can do that.
Okay, so to elaborate on that is the projectional aspect of his game. He is not quite, he doesn't have the experience of playing those positions. I actually don't think he fits nearly as well at guard as people say. I just don't think, like, his style of play, like his independent hand usage, mirror guys the way he does, works best at guard. I think it works better at, like, center and offensive tackle. and I think those would be good spots. Dane, I don't remember what I think it was Daniel Jeremiah said that there is one team out there that has Troy Falatanu as their top center in this draft, and it would be kind of interesting if it ended up being the Steelers in that regard, because they have the need at center. But Falatanu is that guy. I think is just a slam dunk pick at 20.
That's very interesting, because I've been not critical, but he's been a guy that I'm like, I don't know if he's like in the, I don't know if I'd trade up for him. I don't know if I'd pass on him at 20. So it's very interesting to hear that, especially because I looked at it the same way Steven did, is where are you going to play this guy? He might be not the greatest tackle, and then you double dip at center, and then you got issues there. Or what's going to go on there? I don't know. Maybe. I could see his name. I mean, the Steelers have interest in him. And if you could bring somebody in there and then spark the conversation of where are they going to play on the offensive line, I think that's as interesting as it gets for a first-round pick, especially a pick that you have to make. All right, before we close out this show here, we are less than a week away. I want to ask both of you guys, if you had to make your first two selections for the Pittsburgh Steelers, round 1, round 2, who are they as of today? Nick, we'll start with you.
So round 1, round 2. I think what's probably going to end up happening is going to be Armarius Mims at tackle in the first round, and then the next pick will be Ricky Pearsall at 51. I really think that's the direction they end up going.
Where do they go with center? Where do they get a center?
I think center could be someone like a Hunter Norzad from Penn State in like the third round. Norzad, I actually have ahead of Cedric Von Prawn, who's a popular name. And I liked Cedric Von Prawn for quite a while, and I started to notice more cracks with his game. More specifically, it was how he laterally mirrors rushers, and how often I noted that he was just getting like ripped through whenever somebody was just moving laterally, and he seemed like a little bit slow to pick up stunts. That aspect of Hunter Norzad doesn't really show up. I do think he might be a little bit more scheme limited in the run game, but I do think that is a little bit more workable than what Cedric Von Prawn brings in regards to potential pass protection issues.
I like that. So Armarius Mims, Ricky Pearsall, not bad. Steven, who you got? 1 week today, round 1, round 2.
Yeah,
I'm going 1 week yesterday.
Yeah, 1 week yesterday. I'm going in a pretty similar direction. Offensive line first and receivers second, but I'm going Barton, I think. I think Graham Barton is going to be there. I don't think they're going to be able to talk themselves out of it. I just think Barton is a guy that they've shown way too much interest in. He plays, fits too neatly into a position of need for them to really pass up. So Barton in the first round, and then I'm going receiver in the second, and I think Roman Wilson's going to be there. And I think Roman Wilson is going to be the pick. Just has some versatility, tough, great hands, pretty good athlete as well, and a nice route runner. I think he'll fit in pretty well. And I think Barton will be good, and he's going to probably play right away if he gets picked by the Steelers. I think Wilson's going to end up looking like the better pick of those two. Yeah. I think if they're able to get him, he'll be such a factor in the offense this year as a rookie that people are going to be stunned that he fell as far as he did.
So, okay. I'm going to stick with you there at Barton. I think Barton's number 1. I think that's their first round pick. I've held strong to that for a long time. I was almost going to go wide receiver with number 2, not Roman Wilson. I was going to go Malachi Corley, but I think Roman Wilson's up there on my top, 3 guys. Pearsall would probably be number 2 or number 3, vice versa. In my top 3, if these are wide receivers in the second round, this is who the Steelers are going with. I'm going to switch it up. I'm going to go Andrew Phillips out of Kentucky. I think that's a name that the Steelers are gonna key up, and they're gonna really like. I think Max Melton's on there as well, but I don't know if Max Melton's gonna go before 50, 51. But I'm gonna go a corner. I'm gonna say Phillips is the guy. Melton if he falls, but I'm going Graham Barton, and then one of those slot corners.
I think that's a good pick. Andrew Phillips, when I was watching his tape, he actually reminded me a little bit of former Steeler William Gay. And I think, a player like that he's a consistent communicator. He plays in and outside. So I think that'd be a terrific pick. good pull on that one.
Thank you.
You don't think Phillips is a bit of a reach at 51?
I think he'd be a little bit of a reach, but I think he's a little bit of a comfortable reach that I would not like be too upset with. I think Max Melton is that guy I would be much more preferred at like 51.
Yeah.
I think I would prefer Andrew Phillips more in the third, but like 51, I'm okay with that as a reach.
Yeah, I don't think Melton's going to make it to 51. He would be the pick if I had to make, like, if this was an ideal world, but I don't think he's going to be there. And I don't think there's going to be, I think the wide receivers are still going to be a little deep there, and they're going to be able to kind of sit back and say, okay, we'll wait till the third and see what happens. But I don't know, I'm an Andrew Phillips guy, and I think that he'll make some noise in the NFL. With that said, we're heading out of here. Thank you guys so much for jumping on to another episode of All Steelers Talk. Make sure to subscribe to us on YouTube, youtube.com/All Steelers Talk. Check us out anywhere you get your podcasts, and go check out Nick's 2024 NFL Draft Guide, available now at si.com/NFL/Steelers. We will be back on Monday. Enjoy another beautiful weekend in the Berg. Peace.